How many native Alaskan villages have to move due to climate change? Climate change has caused the erosion of shorelines and thawing of permafrost in many Alaska native villages.
How can we adapt our thinking to be more impactful around these issues as individuals?
It is estimated that at least 31 villages in Alaska are currently facing the threat of flooding and erosion due to climate change.
I wound up thinking, now what?
When you're spending a few $100s to try to get out to a place to harvest something.
A lot of people that want to say that there is not a climate crisis.
Welcome to the Sacred Conversation, and I am Vendiola Haskara. Today I'm joined with Robert Landau.
Now we're back.
Hello, Robert. Climate change is here. You just were called to another amazing situation. Would you like to speak about that a little bit?
After I finished the film that we've been talking about, I really needed time off.
Right.
And it seemed like not a good time, really for independent people, writers, filmmakers, that kind of thing. The economy was shifting after 2008. And I remember one of my business colleagues, a real estate investor, said in 2012, I can't close a deal to save my life right now. So, then what about the artists? Can we close a deal to save our lives? Well, I don't know. So 2012, 13, 14, 15, and the politics just went, over to something else. And so I literally couldn't continue the battle. I felt that my spiritual energy was being depleted, in all of this chaos, and nonsense. And so I took time off, and then the pandemic came. I wound up thinking, now what? And I thought, well, I have me. I have me, right? I'm my best asset, and I have questions. So I decided to call people that I knew or that were friends of friends. One of them, the first person, was Scott Ressler, who is senior producer for National Geographic. And Scott had just made a film called The Last Ice, which was about this little area off the tip of Greenland, the north coast of Greenland, which is anticipated to have the last summer ice, in a warming climate, as the Arctic in general, begins to melt, essentially. And I learned that there are many villages, particularly along the west coast of Alaska, that are vulnerable because of the melting sea ice pack. There's sea ice, there's a village, and there's the water, and there's the ocean, right? And that the ocean freezes, and there's a great deal of sea ice. So that acts as a protective barrier against storms and flooding. And so these villages are now in danger, and they're getting flooded, and the permafrost is melting under their feet, where they are. And if they have oil tanks there to supply energy to the villages, that were put there a long time ago, maybe they're tilting and leaning over and leaking and all of these things. And so it's been estimated, and I'm sure this is over the long term, that there are 300 villages that will have to move.
May I ask you quickly? So in the permafrost, when the ice is melting, so is it? How can people understand that? Is it pushing literally the houses, do they literally slide because a lot of the houses are like so vulnerable to the ice and where they are built? Is it literally sliding the grounds, or is the water levels rising that, or both? I mean, is it both? I think it's both, right?
Right, it's both. Well, in a cold Arctic environment, you have most of the landscape frozen for a good part of the year, and that allows people to transport themselves and move. You can use dog sleds or snow machines.
Pack ice that I talked about that has been retreating also protects this peninsula from the worst ravages of winter storms. On top of that, the warming climate is melting the permafrost. And then the migratory patterns and the fish, they live in a certain temperature, they return at a certain time of the year. When the climate starts to shift, migratory patterns shift. It may be more expensive to get out to where the resources are. I mentioned fuel can cost $8, $9, $10 a gallon.
And you can travel on that ice, and you can travel over, a frozen lake or a part of the ocean. If you want to go out fishing, you know where the fish go, where the fish migrate, and you have to get out over there, so you hop on the snow machine and try to get out there, and you got to pay for gas, and maybe you're going to shoot a seal, for dinner or something like that, which they do, not being vegan or anything. And so all those things are expensive. Like bullets are expensive. You want to hunt, it's expensive. And everything's melting around you. So now you can't get there. You can't run your snow machine over the ice out onto the water. You can't get to the place where the animals or fish that you're trying to, catch are, and so it puts the survival of the people in jeopardy, and they can't live there anymore. For one thing, it's not safe. It's not safe, and you don't have access to anything. All the traditional knowledge and wisdom is being affected drastically. So knowing where the ice is, where it comes, where the whale is, where the seals are, where the fish are, what time of year there's a migration, when you can fish for this species or that species, and salmon or other things that we eat, it's all thrown into chaos.
You can't ask of people who have been connected to a place for so long to just uproot and move to someplace else. That's not, for the natives and for the tribe that lives there, that's not an option.
So Scott's movie, The Last Ice, is very beautiful, and he follows Inuit people back and forth between Denmark and Greenland as they struggle with entering and participating in modern society, in, let's say, Denmark, while still wanting to go teach their children how to hunt with the elders back in Greenland, and it all becomes pretty darned impossible. This film opened me up, and then I started talking to people like Larry Mercurlioff from the Pribilof Islands, who you would really like, I think. He is a very spiritual person, and talked about the depth of knowledge that people have about the environment and what that means, and why the scientists miss it. They don't see the connections. And so he talked about the struggle of the Native people of trying to convince the scientific community that their 10,000 years of traditional wisdom means something today in terms of management of wild places and wildlife. And it's been a struggle for them. And many interviews later, Kajung, Stephen Blanchett, who is a Yupik singer and really a rock and roll star, a really cool guy. His father is Black from Philadelphia, and his mother is Yupik. So he calls himself Kajung Yufrikan. And so he's a very modern person with a great sense of humor, obviously, but, was raised in a traditional place, and talked about his childhood and how there were no flush toilets and what life was like there. And it it was not easy even in better times. But one of the points he made was, we've been dealing with climate change for 40 years. This is not new.
I've been following the ice melting, and the rapid disappearing of the ice is definitely shocking. And why it is also so significant is there's the rapid, melting of the ice has literally also affected Europe in the change of the winters, or the effects are felt globally for sure. And also depending on where the stream is directly flowing in the Gulf Stream, and how it's all needed to stay intact, because once you have something on one side imbalanced, and the other side is getting imbalanced as well. So I think the effects are tremendous, so huge. And nobody is, you see, that the interesting thing is, in all these emergencies for people, or like this town who's very likely having to move, and who is moving them, and where is the funding for the moving, and all of that. I mean,
right. Well, I'm sure you would feel the same way. If something's wrong, it's wrong. I mean,
absolutely.
I had parents who taught me, a few lessons in life. Don't exploit and hurt people being one of them.
There's a Lushootseed word, it's Hachusadat, and the simplified version of that is education, but really Hachusadat is traditions of the heart. And with traditions of the heart comes compassion. But tradition of the heart means that we know what our values are, and we uphold those values.
This is maybe where the spiritual part comes in, the feeling, I would say, in my case, just the feeling.
Exactly. I wanted to ask you, I'm sorry. Yes, exactly. I wanted to ask you about that, because in a way, when you have that, when you make a connection with something, it is really beyond you. There is a calling, something is calling you to take that stand. And yes, is it a spiritual connection? Is it a calling, or are you just called from the energies of, the people with their power of prayers, and you connected on a wavelength to being called to standing up for them? So I think the mysteries are so large. We don't know is through which powers are we called to something, and sometimes it shows later in time why you were drawn to something, right?
When we talk about power, it's not political. When we talk about power, it's not this grid that provides our energy. When we talk about power, it really is the water and the wind and the waves and the thunder and the lightning. That's power. When I talk about the earth, purging because she has a fever, that's what I'm talking about.
What is so sad is it's very hard for people to put themselves into the shoes of someone who is really suffering, to losing their home, their house, their town, their history, and there's so much connected with that.
Well, that's a good point, because when you look at COP17 and COP16 and the emphasis on environmental justice and environmental equity and climate equity, that's the beginning of that conversation. And this is current, right? This is not 10 years ago. This was not on the radar of most people in policy around the world and related to the UN, the IPCC goals on climate, to reduce greenhouse gases by 2050. So this is a recent part of the global conversation, really. Do Indigenous people have a place at the table? Can we take into account the knowledge of having been in a place for 10,000 years? Do we have a way to incorporate that into the modern scientific understanding? So you get into a lot of things like race, assumptions, scientific, ego control. Australia didn't do very well with their global standing with regard to the COP process because of the lobbying by their coal industry. So they're like major coal producers. They're not going to shut down tomorrow. They're going to lie a little bit, and they're going to shove things under the rug over there. And, maybe we can get away with this over here, and we should buy some time, or, we'll tell the coal companies, we're going to delay, and, for another 20 years, we'll give you 20 years to make your profits, and then you got to get out, that kind of thing. So all these deals are being made.
So to back up just for just a moment, how did it happen that, so you saw the film, which was from this film producer of the Last Eye.
I just got on the phone with all these people in Alaska.
So
we all have cell phones, and they're sitting around in the pandemic too, wondering what to do in the village.
So
oh God, like grandma's dying of COVID, what are we going to do? And then I call up on the phone and say, hey, let's talk about this. I'm down here in San Francisco. I'd like to talk about it. I'd like to do a podcast and, and have, a way for people to understand what's going on. And when I was talking to Kajung, his name is spelled, by the way, Qacung, which Kajung, his Americanized name is Stephen Planchette. And I said, so what are you doing about all this? And he said, well, I'm doing the same thing you're doing. Meaning talking, listening, exchanging ideas, trying to get it out there, in some understandable way for people.
Kivalina is a village that's located on a strip of land that is getting narrower by the day from erosion, primarily because of the ice continuing to melt due to global warming. Buildings and things are falling into the waters. They need to move, but the urgency of moving won't be funded until it's actually a disaster area.
And then the point about empathy is a huge movement now too, in policy and personal interrelations and community. And, we've had the George Floyd, incident, and so much racial strife, and Black men having a shorter lifespan because of police bullets. The cops are out there highly militarized, using that military technology in the streets against people. Where did that come from?
It is shocking. It is shocking we live in 2023, and we are in our consciousness of feeling unified with the whole world is still so much work to do. And how can we do it? We are seeing the problem, and so now, what are the best solutions? Right? What are the solutions we can take? And films and awareness and communicating about it is definitely a very big step towards the direction, and hoping to possibly align ourselves with more and more people who are like-minded and interested in uniting on in other ways than we can even imagine, to coming together and standing up for those in need. And I do have a belief and trust in some way. It's interesting. I do believe that the times are changing because the consciousness is rising. The awareness is rising, and I think it is that the saying, that you need a minority of having that combustion of consciousness about something, the awareness suddenly coming together. I I do have my hopes up for that. And still, it will take some time, and we have to be patient and keep bringing the right voices together. And hopefully more and more people can feel that there's some little steps everyone can take in each life.
We are the ones in need.
Communication is critical and important at a time like this, and it's only now really starting, and it's being demanded by the American Indian Alaska Native community that climate issues be addressed, because as we've just demonstrated, we are severely affected and impacted by what's going on in climate change in this country and in this world today.
We're all the ones in need. There's no distinction, between this flesh and that flesh. In the era of climate, no one has a little blue island, where everything is, beautiful. And
born and raised on St. Paul Island, part of the Pribilof Islands, in the middle of the Bering Sea, that is not part of the Aleutian chain, but is in the middle, up above the Aleutian chain, about 250 miles from the nearest land along the Aleutian chain. And I was born and raised on an island that's very small. It's 12 miles wide and 12 miles long and 5 miles wide. And we had, when I was a child, about 1.2 million northern fur seals and 2.5 million seabirds, 1,000 reindeer, and 500 Dunungan people in both St. George and St. Paul. My people understood that we had to be present in the moment and in the heart. The rest will be taken care of. And it requires a trust in every aspect of being a human being, that we had to embody this trust at the cellular level.
You can do a lot of things when your mindset is in that direction, in those mysteries, right? How can we know that you're connected with them? So I think that is also a spiritual ability to being so sensitive. And when you're sensitive in life, you sometimes hear things, feel things, and you called for something, and before you know it, you're there, and you had no idea how did you get there.
Where we trusted in ourselves, our lives, trust in our community, trust in the land, the sea, trust in the Mother Earth, universe, and a being that we call a Ro. That we need to trust at such a level that there was not a shred of doubt in our bodies. And with that kind of trust, everything is taken care of if you're in the heart and present in the moment.
Alaska Native people have had to adjust for centuries to changing circumstances and conditions. Back in the 1600s, the people who now live in the native village of Hoona in southeast Alaska were actually living in Glacier Bay during an advance of glaciers. And it was a rapid advance. The local people, through the oral history, said that the glaciers were moving as fast as a dog runs. So they left the Glacier Bay area, relocated. Now those glaciers are receding as a part of the climate change that is occurring. But what's going to happen is that they won't be able to return to their traditional homelands, because Glacier Bay is now a wilderness area. It's not accessible. A lot of the issues faced by Alaska Natives is that because Alaska was such a pristine state back in the 1970s and 80s, a lot of it was set aside for federal purposes. It just gives me another argument for, if the feds have so much land here and are locking up so many resources, is it not a part of their obligation to return some of that resource value to Alaska Native communities that suffer because of their inability to develop those resources.
My colleague and friend, Patrick Anderson, and his company is called Patrick Anderson's Future State. And so we developed this company name together and this company approach. And really it's predicated on the idea that, we have a vision of the future, but we don't know how to get there. Patrick, as a Tlingit Native American elder, can draw upon, his teachings to support a way to understand our lives as we go forward and feel more comfortable and confident in light of climate change and all of these things.
What is the public health cost for climate change related trauma and rising subsistence expenses for Alaska Natives? This conversation is really very beautiful and very inspiring.
Stories are the basis of everything. It's about becoming inspired by the story and finding a personal connection to it and maybe a global connection.
Thank you so much, Robert, for your time.
Blessings to you.
Blessings to you.
People that are going to listen to this, and I'll thank you for your good work.
Thank you for your time, Robert. Such a joy finding out what you're up to.